I'm Dijin, and I'm presenting EPF, Evil Packet Filter, and this is a joint work with Vaggelis, Atlidakis, and my advisor, Vasileios, Kemerlis. We're all from Brown University. So our work will be discussing how BPF can weaken kernel security. We will first go through some background on kernel security and exploitation. Then we'll go through what is BPF, and then we'll show how BPF enables new attacks in the kernel and how to defend against them. And finally, we will show the evaluation of the effectiveness of our attacks and the performance of our defenses. So the kernel sits at the center of modern computing systems. And they're in charge of a lot of tasks, such as providing abstractions, managing devices, and as a security person, most importantly, we say, the operating system has a job of manage privileges and control security and enforce security policies. And as a result, the OS kernels are a very lucrative target for attackers. Breaking or compromising kernel security can gain the attacker all of their privileges and also bypass all the defense mechanisms enforced by the kernel. Unfortunately, OS kernels are usually very complex. For example, Linux kernel have more than 25 million lines of code, and hundreds of vulnerabilities are discovered every year, partly thanks to the advances in kernel fuzzing, and also these vulnerabilities takes non-trivial amount of time to be fixed, which gives importance to the research of kernel security and protection. On the other hand, kernel exploitation is the art of breaking kernel security. So what will happen in this situation is that there will be an attacker who is an unprivileged user on the system, and they will seek to escalate privilege. But on the kernel side, there's usually assumed to be a memory safety vulnerability, such as buffer overflow or use of the free. Traditionally, what will happen is that the attacker will employ some strategy called red to user. The way red to user works is that the attacker will use the memory corruption vulnerability to hijack the control flow to run some malicious code in user space. Or alternatively, they can hijack the control flow to reuse some kernel code, but at the same time hijack the context to some malicious context placed in user space and escalate privilege in that way. The defense against red to user type of attack is a well-researched topic, and there are very mature hardware-assisted defenses. For example, here there is SMAP and PXN, CPU features from Intel and ARM respectively. They're designed to stop control flow from being hijacked to user space code. And also there's SMAP and PAN. They're again CPU features from Intel and ARM respectively. They're designed to stop unintended user space access. Access to user space data. So we have solved the kernel exploitation problem, or have we? And the answer is obviously mostly no. So there are ways to bypass red to user defenses. Notably, there's red to dir, which abuses the implicit sharing between memory sharing between kernel space and user space. And also, sometimes there's a trick commonly used by some exploit developers that sometimes vulnerabilities gives the attacker the ability to overwrite control registers, which can lead to the attacker directly turn off the defenses. In this work, we will introduce a more interesting way to bypass red to user defenses using BPF. So what is BPF? BPF is a mechanism for user applications to delegate safely computations into the kernel. It's basically a small virtual machine-like virtual architecture with a RISC-like instruction set. It has a lot of applications nowadays, including packet filtering, system call filtering, and network routing, etc., etc. There are two flavors of BPF currently in the Linux kernel. There is the classic BPF, which is more available and older. There's the extended BPF, which is cooler, newer, and has more functionality. Their instruction kind of look like the right-hand side. The top is CBPF, the bottom is EPF. Both types of instruction have 8 byte in size. They have opcode, immediate, and destination source registers, and all of these fields. And these instructions have the basic functionalities of ALU, memory accesses, branching, etc. And to enforce, to verify the safety of these BPF programs, there will be a static verifier verify the safety of the BPF program when they are loaded into the kernel, and mainly to verify that first they terminate, and second that the pointer accesses they do are safe and within what they're supposed to access. And also, BPF programs have the ability to choose whether they want to be interpreted or compiled at runtime. And CBPF are internally translated into EPF because they want to unify the runtime. In this work, we'll exclusively focus on the interpretation part of BPF. So with all the background set, let's talk about how BPF can enable new attacks on the kernel. Our work will operate under the assumption that the attacker, again, is an unprivileged user on the system, and they're able to trigger some memory safety vulnerabilities. On the kernel side, we assume that CBPF is enabled, which is virtually always the case with modern kernel configurations. And also, we assume that the red-to-user defenses that we just mentioned are enabled, and along with other standard protection mechanisms such as execute on memory and KSLR. So the core idea of our attack is that BPF programs are a great candidate for being code reuse payload, which is another word for the malicious context the attacker can use when they're trying to reuse kernel code. And the reasons are these. First, BPF allows the attacker to create a large amount of content in the kernel space. And second, because BPF programs is basically an array of BPF instructions, the attacker have relatively free control over the content. And most importantly and interestingly, BPF programs live inside the kernel and are used by the kernel. Therefore, they are more deeply coupled with the rest of the kernel data than anything else. This will make this method bypass the existing isolation mechanism and defense mechanisms. But there are still challenges to use BPF as a code reuse payload. So here is a BPF instruction. An attacker creating BPF program can easily control the immediate part, immediate field, which is 4 byte out of 8. And the other parts, the attacker have some influence, but it's relatively hard to control. So it's for the most part, the attacker can only control every 4 byte out of 8 byte in a BPF program, which is not enough to fit in a pointer on 64-bit architecture. And also, these BPF programs are read-only in memory. So the question is, if we try to use this as a BPF, as a code reuse payload, what's the code that we're reusing? Which brings us to the first attack, the BPF-Reuse attack. We make the observation that BPF programs are verified statically when they're loaded into the kernel once, and but on the other hand, the BPF program can mean very different things if you start interpreting from a different offset. So for example, here is a BPF program. The normal interpretation is shown on the top half there. It's a bunch of loading immediates into registers. But if you start 4 bytes into the BPF program, it will be memory access, register move, and addition. So basically, the point here is that it is possible to embed an unverified, unsafe BPF program inside a safe one. So the answer to the question, what code do we reuse, is that the code that we're reusing is the BPF interpreter. And the way the attack works is that, as usual, the attacker will try to hijack the control flow, redirect it to the BPF interpreter. At the same time, the attacker will hijack the context to point to the unaligned BPF program, which is malicious and crafted by the attacker. And therefore, in this case, the attacker is still making the kernel executing the BPF interpreter, but we essentially escape the sandbox provided by BPF because we're executing the unaligned BPF code, which cannot be verified to be safe. This unaligned BPF programs can be very expressive. They can do arithmetics between registers. They can do memory operations, branching, and also loading arbitrary immediate values into registers. And with all of these power, it's relatively straightforward to escalate privilege from this point. We chose to overwrite the attacker's process credential to escalate privilege. Looking at the bigger picture, the way our attack works and bypass red-to-user defenses is that, first of all, we are reusing kernel code, which is the BPF interpreter, and also our code reuse payload are placed in the kernel space, which is the unaligned BPF program. Therefore, they cannot be defended against by previous defenses. Another way to make BPF into code reuse payload is BPF-ROP. Basically, on 32-bit architecture, this attack works on 32-bit architectures. So on 32-bit architectures, it is still possible for attackers to encode code pointers inside the BPF programs in the immediate fields. So so basically, for every instruction, the immediate field will be a code pointer. So in this situation, we show that it is still possible to do classic ROP with the restriction that the code gadgets that you choose need to accommodate for the fact that there are 4 byte holes between the regions that the attacker can control. Sorry. So in this scenario, the code reuse target that we're reusing is basically pieces of special code gadgets scattered around the kernel. And the code reuse payload is basically the BPF programs pretending to be a stack filled with code pointers. And when this attack is being carried out, these code pointers will steer the code reuse between the code pointers between the selected code pointers. Between the selected code snippets. So and ROP attack from this point has been shown to be really powerful, and it's relatively straightforward to escalate privilege from this point again. So that concludes our attacks. Now we look at how to solve the problems. So the root cause of the problem, of the attacks, is that there's weak isolation between the interpretation of BPF and the access of regular kernel data. Similar problems have shown up when we had weak isolation between data and native code. So drawing inspiration from past research, we have developed 3 defenses to strengthen the separation: BPF-ISR, BPF-NX, and BPF-CFI. They are designed to prevent mismatches between the access types and the data types. So we're going to go into them in a little bit more detail. First, there's BPF-ISR, inspired by instruction set randomization. This defense will randomize the in-memory representation of BPF programs. such that they cannot be easily used as any other type of data, which will prevent BPF-ROP. And the way we implement this is we add a random mask to each BPF program, and we only temporarily unmask them during the interpretation. There's the second defense is BPF-NX, which is inspired by non-executable memory. It is designed to prevent the BPF interpreter from fetching BPF instructions from anywhere other than, prevent BPF interpreter from fetching anything other than BPF instructions. This is implemented by having a designated region for BPF to allocate BPF programs and having a range check inside the interpreter. There's also BPF-CFI, inspired by control flow integrity. This will make sure that the interpretation of BPF will always start from the beginning of a BPF program, which will stop the BPF-Reuse attack. And the way we implement this is we have a entry point check in the interpreter, and we make sure that even under control flow hijack, this check cannot be bypassed. So that's our defenses. Now we go to the evaluation. First, the attacks. We apply our attack techniques on different vulnerabilities, and we turn previous exploits into exploits that bypass read to user defenses using EPF techniques. And also, we did an empirical study on the amount of potential payload an attacker can inject into the kernel using different methods. The x-axis here is the physical RAM size, and the y-axis here is the memory footprint of the corresponding method. So BPF is represented by the blue lines, by the blue line and the green line here, set socked up and secomp. So you can see that BPF can inject a relatively large amount of content into the kernel, which translates into a high probability of success when actually doing the exploits. We also evaluate the performance of the kernel hardened with our defenses on BPF-heavy tasks. First, we have secomp, system call filtering. We run Nginx and Redis with secomp enabled. The green bars are the baseline. They're Nginx and Redis running on vanilla kernel without secomp enabled. And the red bars are the performance with secomp enabled on vanilla kernel, and the blue bars are the secomp with in the hardened kernel. So we can see here that our defenses introduced 2.2% and 1.7% decrease in throughput in each case. We also test our defense on packet filtering. We selected 6 filtering rules. The exact rules can be found in the paper. The y-axis here is the throughput of filtering, and the blue bars are performance on vanilla kernel, and the orange bars are the performance on the hardened kernels. We can see here that there is the performance decrease ranges from 1.2% to 3.2%. We also have XDP. We selected 5 XDP programs from the XDP paper, and again, y-axis is the throughput, and blue bars are the vanilla kernel, orange bar hardened kernel, and we show that there is a 0 to 2.9% performance decrease in this situation. So to conclude, we have 2 novel attacks abusing the BPF subsystem. And the 2 attacks are BPF-Reuse and BPF-ROP. We successfully applied them to real-world vulnerabilities. And we also develop defenses against abuses of BPF, and they incur low and negligible or moderate overhead. The source of the attacks and the defenses can be found, rather will be found in this link. And also, yeah, that will be all. I will also do a poster session afterwards, and if anyone wants to talk about BPF, kernel, and anything in general, you can find me there. Thank you so much.